Hey, Calvary Youth Leaders, this is Tim. So awesome to see you. I wanted to take a few minutes of your time to chat about what we were talking about on Tuesday night this week, a passage that's made a huge impact on my life and something that I've really tried to pass on to the people that I disciple. And I'm really excited for you guys to be sharing this to all the students. Um, at Calvary, and I've just been praying that it would be impactful in your hearts and your lives as well. So, the passage that we're going to be talking about is John chapter 4, and we're actually going to be starting in verses 31 and going about verses 34. But the context of this passage is that Jesus has met the woman at the well, the famous Samaritan woman who is living in a lot of sin, and Jesus comes and tells her everything that she has ever done. And we see in verse um, chapter 4, verse 29, the Samaritan woman says, "Come and see to the town," which "come and see" is a theme that we've been reiterating with the students about come and see who Jesus is. So she has seen who Jesus is, and he has given her everlasting water, and so she is now inviting the entire town out to come and see who she is, but who Jesus is. But during this time, Jesus' disciples come back, and that's what we're really going to be focusing on. We're talking about different interactions between Jesus and his close disciples, and what do we learn about discipleship and about following Jesus um, from these interactions. And so John chapter 4 is a cool interaction between Jesus and his disciples. So John chapter 4 verse 31 says, "Meanwhile disciples were urging him, 'Rabbi, eat.' But he says to them, 'I have food that you do not know about.'" So the picture is what's going on. Jesus had been hanging out at the well. It's been middle of the day. It's been hot, and the disciples have gone somewhere off to get food and bring it back so they can all enjoy and be refreshed and eat. And so as they come back, they're telling Jesus, "Hey, eat this food that we brought back. Be nourished." And Jesus telling them that I have food you don't even know about. And the disciples verse 33, so the disciples say to one another, has anyone brought him something to eat? They're thinking someone else brought Jesus food. And we're going to kind of be talking about three different words with the students this week. The first of those words is food. um, Such a great question. And so Jesus tells them this: "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." Read that again. "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work." The first word that we've been talking about with the students is food. And a great question that someone asked me, someone from Latin America asked me, is this question: what is food? Like, what does food represent in your country, in your world? Food, in many ways, represents fun, represents celebration, represents activity, represents relaxation, friends. If you go to other countries where people don't have nearly as much as us, food really represents life. And in many ways, if you get down to it in our world, food represents a lot of life. We even have a term called comfort food, right? We think of things that we want to enjoy, that we want to eat, and it relaxes us. It puts us in a happy state of mind. Like, no, we even have a term called hangry, that when you don't have food, you are angry. But food is the opposite of that. It's enjoyment, it's comfort, it's joy, it's happiness. And Jesus in this passage is saying, my food, like my enjoyment, my happiness, my joy is what? I love how Jesus just illustrates this with food, something these probably teenage disciples would have understand really well. He says, so the first word that you kind of want to dissect and talk about with the students is this idea of food. What exactly is food? How would they define that? So that when you hear that word food, you're kind of thinking of your own enjoyment. And for Jesus uses the same illustration. His food, what is his comfort is like another, what is his enjoyment that we could say? What is that? And Jesus says this: is to do the will of him who sent me. Jesus' comfort is to do the will of God. John chapter 5, if we flip over verse 30, Jesus says this: I seek not on my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Jesus came to this world not on his own accord, not to accomplish all of his own plans, but to do what God sent him to do. And so the question that naturally comes up is, what is God's will for Jesus to do? Why did Jesus come to this earth? Right? I think we know this answer. Like, why did God send his son to this earth? It's the gospel. It's to save the sins of humanity. We're going to flip back in the book of Luke, chapter 22. And I believe we are going to be in verse 42, if I can find it. And when he came to the place, he said to them, Jesus talking to his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he's going to be handed over to be killed, to be crucified. He says, pray that you may not enter into, Jesus says, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And there appeared before him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. Jesus knows that God's will for him is to go and die, to go and give his life. And that is, Jesus saying, this is his comfort, if you will, like his food, his nourishment, his life, his supply is to obey what God has said, which is to go to the cross, to give up his life as a ransom for us. As Jesus followers, when we answer this question, what is our food? What is our comfort? Is it to do the will of God? Is it our comfort to die? Galatians 2:20, right? Let's look at that real quick. Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. Is it our will? Is it our food, our enjoyment, our happiness to die to ourselves? This is not an easy thing. This is not a simple, flippant saying. And the disciples at this time when Jesus talking to them, Jesus probably do not get this. But they probably thought in their minds, what is he talking about? His food is to do the will of God. His food is to do what? And maybe later, as they look back and they thought about this conversation, remember when Jesus told us that his food, his happiness, was to obey God to the point that he was going to be crucified? In America, we all have our own dreams. We all have our own visions in life, things that we're excited about. And this verse is telling us that our dreams need to be God's dreams, that we are in submission to him, that he is the boss, that he is in charge, not us. This is a hard thing for us in our culture to grasp, but it's a life of total submission. This is a step in the road of discipleship, that our lives are not our own. We are not in charge. For us as adults, this is hard to wrestle with, and for teenagers especially. And knowing for them and us, it is a journey of continually learning to give our lives and everything that we have over to Christ. That we are not our own, that he has bought us with a price, and that our lives belong to him. And it is our happiness, our enjoyment, and our comfort to give up our lives for him. So that's the second word. First word was our food, our happiness. Second word is will. What is God's will? And the third word is this. Jesus says, my food, John 4, verse 34, is to do the will of him who sent me, and to what? To accomplish his work. To accomplish his work. So if God's will for Jesus was to die, if God's will for you and I is to die to ourselves, what is the work then of God? We know, I believe it's in John, that we are told the work of God is to believe God, which is a huge, tremendous, big part of our relationship with our Lord, is to continually believe him. But let's look in John chapter 17, verse 4, as Jesus uses the same word here um, in Luke, and Jesus says this in 17, verse 4. I glorified you on earth. He's talking about the Father. I glorified the Father on earth and have accomplished the work you gave me to do. Okay, so this is before Jesus has gone to the cross. This is before Jesus has died and shed his spilled blood for humanity. But it says he has accomplished something. What is the work that he has accomplished? That saying that he has glorified the Father. And I believe that Jesus is saying he has glorified the Father through making disciples. That has been the work that Jesus has been continually doing. That as he has spent time with this group of 3 and a group of 12 and a group of 72, that has been the work that has led to the glorification of the Father. This is the work of those of us who are in God's kingdom, is to go and make disciples. And for you and I, when we think about what is God's work, what is God calling us to do actively, it's to bring glory to the Father by making disciples who make disciples. Um, it's a simple 3 words that for my life have changed what I think about. It's changed what I dream about, changed about what I hope for. I'd say it's changed what I would define success. I used to find the success by like what made me happy, what I could earn, what I could do. And now Jesus gives this whole new definition of our success, our food, is to die to ourselves and make disciples. To die to ourselves and make disciples. And that is a lifelong journey that we are on. And it is my prayer that the students this week, as we encourage them with God's word, that they would take the next step, that they would begin to identify, what does it look like for me to die to myself? What does it look like for me to live according to God's will and not my will? And what does it look like for me to do God's work and not my work? I'm going to be praying for you guys. Thank you so much for spending this time listening to this. Have an awesome week investing in these kids. Love you so much. Bye.